How can Aussies impacted by the Optus hack stay safe online?
And what's going to be big at PAX AUS 2022?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award winning network and Australian based support.
Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the award winning tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and sitting in the virtual Vertical Hold studios with me, as usual, is the one and only Adam Turner. Believe me, I've tried the cloning process, it always fails. Hey Adam, this week a beer brand, which I'm not going to name, put out a promotional beer bottle opener that will shut down your laptop if it senses you're opening a beer. And the idea is meant to
Ooh.
be to encourage you to take breaks and obviously to drink beer. I've known you a long time, Adam. Is this the gadget you've always dreamed of?
Almost. They're on the right track, but what I think I want is one that senses the smell of wild turkey and then automatically queues up the Rolling Stones on Spotify. That's when you'll get my money.
Wait, the Rolling Stones aren't automatically always playing in your office?
That's a good point, actually. But also, if we can crash a probe into an asteroid, surely we can solve this technical challenge.
It does seem fairly trivial. It does seem fairly trivial. We're also joined this week in the virtual Vertical Hold studios once again by Alice Clarke from the Oz. Alice, what tipple would you open that would tip off your laptop that it's time to call it a day work-wise?
So I am a non-drinker, but on a Friday night, my wife will make me an incredibly detailed, complicated mocktail that I do not understand what's in it, but it is absolutely delicious. It does not have a name, but it's got like little fancy fruit in it, and it tastes. I think it's supposed to be like some kind of thing that's supposed to taste like whiskey. Either way, that drink, or
So
like a really good ginger beer.
a mocktail detecting radar is what we're talking about here.
Yes, something that smells the terrible, terrible whiff of fake alcohol, and then it's like you're done now.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Now, Alice is joining us largely to talk about PAX Aus 2022. But before we do, we kind of have to divert back to a topic we did address last week because it's the story that keeps on giving, the Optus hack. And when we recorded last week, it was really when it was just emerging that this thing had happened, and a lot of detail has come out since then. A lot of things have happened. Adam, what have we learned in the last week?
We've learned that we maybe don't trust Optus as much as we used to. I think the big things are that they're saying that maybe about 10 million people's details were compromised, but there's different categories of them, and it's only about a quarter of them that look like they had their passport numbers or their driver's license numbers compromised. And my working theory on that is because that is the information they gather when you sign up for a new account. It's part of your 100 points of ID, and then they
hmm
keep that for a couple of years and throw it away. So I'm assuming that those quarter of them, those 2.5 million roughly people are people who've signed up in the last 2 or 3 years. Where if you've been for Optus for longer than that, they've probably thrown away all those details by now, so they're not available for somebody to steal.
So I actually have information on that because my details were caught up in the hack, as was basically my whole family except for my dad. My dad has been with Optus for 30 years. My mum has been with Optus for about 15 years, and I signed up for a separate internet account about 7 years ago. Mum's and my details were leaked.
Did they say whether or not that included the passport and the driver's license?
It didn't specify whether it was the passport or the driver's license, but yes, it was definitely one of those for us. I think if you've signed up for a new contract or changed plans in the last 6 years, I think they had to get your details again. Yeah, it's not just people with a new account; it's also people who recontracted or did other things in that time.
So, Alice, Optus has caught a lot of flack over the last week, a lot of it deserved, but especially over not just the quality of its communication, but the speed of its communication. And I'm really curious, when did they notify you that you're part of the data breach?
So I was notified on Saturday, and I know people who got notified on Sunday, and some, I think, even one was on Monday.
And I definitely, by Monday, I was hearing from people who said they hadn't yet been notified, which of course leaves them in the kind of awful limbo of thinking, well, does that mean that I'm actually perfectly safe, or does that mean that
Mm.
Optus just haven't gotten around to contacting me? Although, I suppose to be slightly fair to Optus, emailing 10 million odd customers, that's not an easy mail merge.
It's not, but also I think given they're a communications company, I'm sure they've got a way to do it. My dad still has not received his email. We're hoping that means they don't have all of his details, but I do know that he has recontracted in the last 5 or 10 years. So let's find out. Let's roll the dice. And let's all say a brief moment of thanks to all the children of older parents who are now having to explain this and tell them not to click things.
Yes, even more than usually having to explain things
Yeah.
and telling them not to click things. I had lunch with my mother-in-law today, so this is now Wednesday, so 6 days after it, and she's an Optus customer and hasn't heard anything yet. So I said to her, "You're probably okay," but I also said to her, because you've been an Optus customer for a long time, maybe they don't have all of that data on you anymore. I would presume that they're contacting the people first whose passports and driver's licenses and Medicare cards, as it turns out, they just
Mm,
happen to mention in passing.
yeah.
Those things that have been compromised, which is the kind of things you need for 100 points of ID, I would imagine they're contacting those people first, because if that information about you is out there in the wild, that's a lot more. That puts you at a much greater risk than if it's just your phone number and your postal address.
And that makes a lot of sense to me. And also it reminds me to call my mother in law because I'm sure that's going to be fun for her if she got caught up in this. Yeah, I wish they would be able to be more specific about and tell me if it was my driver's license or my passport because I can't remember what I put down all those years ago. I don't know exactly which thing to get changed. I'm going to get both of them changed, but it would be nice to know how concerned I should be about different things.
It's also kind of crazy when you consider part of Optus's response is to say that for heavily affected customers, presumably this first group that we're talking about contacted, sorry to panic you there, Alice, because
Oh
you
no,
might seem to be part of that first group.
I definitely
They've
am.
they've said for heavily affected customers, they will contact them and offer 12 months of credit reporting. So watching over your name and details to
Hmm.
let you know if those details are being used fraudulently, which is a nice step. But it also seems to me to be this kind of Gordian knot of how they're going to do it, because they've said, we're not going to send anything out with links, which presumably means you get an email where you're told, well, look, basically, Google the name of this service provider. Make sure you click on the right link, not the fraudulent link. Put your details and these details in there. Hope like crazy that you didn't get the URL wrong, and then maybe you'll be covered. And again, we come back to that kind of elderly parents, mother in law principle. And I don't mean to demean elder Australians, many of whom are incredibly tech
Hmm.
savvy, but
Very tech savvy.
there's a percentage who are not, who will find all of that utterly baffling, and of course, who may well fall victim to separate scammers pretending to be Optus in the meantime.
Yeah, it doesn't help also that Optus, after saying days saying we won't send you any links, don't click any links from Optus, we won't send you any links. They send when they give you your bill, they send you a text message that contains 2 links. And
I shouldn't laugh, but I mean,
yeah,
wow, that's special.
someone in my family got one of those today, and now we're having to have the discussion of is this really a bill? It's the same as all the other ones, and it came from the same number, but how do we know?
Well, the other way that this got crazy this week was actually in the alleged, and I say alleged because identification is tricky, and that's some Australian tech journalists have been doing some amazing work here. I'd call out Jeremy Kirk specifically as
Amazing work.
really, really leading the charge on this one. Uh, the alleged hacker at first said, "Right, I want $1 million in cryptocurrency, and if I don't get it, I'm going to release 10,000 names into the wild every day until Optus complies." But that kind of petered out pretty quickly, didn't it?
I like to think that this young person, I'm assuming they're young given the anime avatar, suddenly caught a bout of conscience and was like, actually, you know what? Maybe it is bad to dox 11 million Australians so I can get 1 million US dollars in cryptocurrency that will probably fall tomorrow. Maybe it'd be better if this just didn't happen. But also, the cynic in me says that Optus probably just paid him and then paid him a bit extra to say that he wasn't paid.
I
That's my assumption. Or it was a different guy.
Or is this
Like, it's
whole
so
thing?
hard to know.
We don't even know that this person was real, do we? Or is it some of the data they seem to be releasing seem to be legit, but they
They
didn't sound
seem
legit?
they seem credible. I think we can say that they seem credible. I wonder, Alice, if it's not the case that Mum found out that they were blackmailing
I
a
thought
large
of that too.
corporation and ruler across the
Yeah.
knuckles time. But
And we should thank mothers everywhere
Yes.
for that kind of power.
absolutely, absolutely. But it means that of these anywhere from 3 to 10 million mildly to heavily compromised accounts, 10,000 of them are definitely sort of out in the wild, which is
Oh yeah, they're
bad.
screwed.
And then we've got the rest of this data group where the hacker says they've deleted the only copy,
I'm sure they're
but
trustworthy.
yeah, what level of trust do we put in that? It's really hard.
And also, how do we know that there was only one person that accessed all this? From what I've been reading, it was just an API that anybody who found the web address could access. So how can we be sure only one person got it?
I mean, yeah,
Surely,
Optus hasn't. Optus has not outright come out and said yes, it was an open API. A lot of other sources have indicated it probably was. They were still somewhat hanging on the idea of it was a sophisticated cyber attack, and an
yeah.
awful lot of people seem to be laughing and saying, "No, no, it really, really wasn't."
I
Um,
would be shocked if Optus would mislead people about such a thing and continue trying to insist that it was some state-based operator who did a very sophisticated attack and not just that they accidentally left the door open. Um, the thing that I found most galling was in one of the original media releases. Optus was like, let's make this a Team Australia issue, said the Singapore based company. Like, no, this is not a time to play on patriotism. This is a time to grovel and apologize and certainly not be sending out bills with links in them.
Well, maybe not sending out bills for a while unless it's to
Yeah.
Optus itself, because there is also the question, and obviously, Alice, you've already said you're going to look into changing over your identity documents once you can work out what those are.
Mm.
But that is a hassle. But as is emerging, pretty much as we're recording this, it looks like for some of those identity documents, it might not be a cost.
Yes, so it looks like for some states, and by the time you're listening to this, it could be all states, hopefully, you can get your driver's license changed over for free. And as of today, Wednesday, Penny Wong has written to Optus to say, hey, would you like to foot the bill for everyone's new passports? Because I think we would like you to do that. Um, and I would hate to be an Optus shareholder right now. I'd also hate to be in the passport office, which is already completely overwhelmed. I had a friend who had to wait 6 months for their passport and missed out on 2 work trips because of it.
I am
Uh,
currently sitting 2 months into waiting on replacement passports, and that's for regular passports. This will make it
mm,
so much worse because you're right. The backlog is huge, but of course, with fake identity data out there as well, they are going to have to quadruple check everything to make
yeah.
sure that every single passport applicant is who they say they are and not an Optus fraudulent person. It means my plans to get that passport in the name of Adam Turner, they're just not going to pay out.
Like, if I was one of these companies or government bodies, I would be insisting on having the person come down in person with their physical documents to be able to do anything. But I think in this new world, that would be very difficult to implement.
Well, that's what Optus
However,
introduced.
yeah.
If you one of the first precautions they put in is if you want to do a SIM swap now to a new handset, which is a way often that people hijack mobile
Mm,
numbers, they won't do that online anymore. You have to go into an Optus shop with your 100 points of ID and prove that you really be you before they will do it because they realize that is one of the easiest ways that someone could misuse this information and make money out of it because one of the common reasons why those SIM swaps happen is they target business owners who they know have two-factor authentication set up for their online banking. So they get their online banking login and password, and then they wait until 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is, and they hijack their mobile phone number and switch it over to a new handset. And of course, the business owner doesn't realize, and then they go in and try to get into the bank account. It says, "Oh, you'll need your two-factor code." Sends the two-factor code to the mobile they've got in their hand because they've hijacked the number. They get in there and clean out the bank account, and by the time the business owner realizes that their phone doesn't work anymore because the number's been stolen, it's too late and their bank account's been cleared out. This kind of thing happens regularly, and clearly Optus went, "Yeah, if I had this data, this is one of the first things I'd do." So they've tried to stomp on that.
Thank goodness Optus has managed to close that door after the horses bolted.
Yes.
I can't wait to show them 100 points of ID again. I'm sure they can be trusted with that.
Well, this does raise the question around what needs to change here, because the surprising thing from the reading that I've been doing, and I am not a lawyer, I'm as much of a lawyer as Lionel Hutz is that it appears that while Optus has stuffed up royally, it does not appear to have actually specifically broken Australian laws in doing so. It notified of the data breach in fairly, quick time, exceptionally quick time by Australian standards. We don't have a general data protection right. So the actual redress that people have, you see a lot of social media chatter of "I'm very angry with Optus and they must pay," but as it stands, you might not have too much of a grounds to make, apart from maybe the cost of those replacement documents, to make them pay.
Yeah, turns out Australian law sucks worse than we thought. That's a shame. That's pretty much my main
Yeah.
takeaway from that.
Yeah.
It's time to change some laws and maybe write some new ones, and maybe make it so the power is in the hands of the consumers whose data is most at risk, and not the hands of the corporations who claim to have our best interests at heart, but really have their shareholders' wallets at heart.
I
Like that's
I think the big thing that needs to be changed here, I think I talked about it last week, and the government's already hinting at this, is the way that data retention laws work when it comes to things like 100 points of ID. Optus has to, by law, collect that data, and they have to hang on to it. They have to hang on to, photocopies of your driver's license or your passport. There are better ways to do that where Optus can say, yes, we've cited that document and it'll tick it off in the system, but not physically keep a copy, which is then available to be stolen. But that means that we need to change our data infrastructure and the way people control their data and systems talk to each other. And then it's like, okay, who are we going to put in charge of that? Oh, well, why don't I just link it all to my MyGov account? Zzz. No, people don't, do you know what I mean? It's a
yeah.
great idea, but then who do you trust? At the end of the day, someone's got to run this infrastructure. So it really requires building a whole new way of doing things. And I'm sure the Web3 people are very excited at this point. But
This is going to make things very difficult. This is only going to make brand new problems. I think our government is perhaps a bit too wussy and a bit too light-handed. Like the Australian government in general, not just the current Albanese government. I'm talking decades of governments are too afraid to do anything that will actually inconvenience a corporation, even if it means preventing or making this happen less. And anything they write is probably going to open up a new rabbit hole for this to get worse again. But we need to solve this one because this can't happen again. And at the moment, I don't see a reason why it wouldn't and why it couldn't and why it might not happen again tomorrow.
And this is the thing. It's not exactly as though this breach is good news for Optus's network competitors either, because it could well have happened to them. And even if they actually have some of those locks and security measures in place, and let's face it, after this week, I'm sure if they don't, they have just bolted those on, or I hope they will. It's going to make things more difficult for them in a data sense anyway. Consumers are hopefully going to be a little bit more wary, but also any regulation that comes in will make it a more convoluted process. And I don't think anyone was massively hanging out for the idea of, hey, let's make signing up for a mobile or broadband plan more difficult.
You also got to face the thing at the moment that I have only seen these communications from Optus in English. I have not.
Mm.
I wonder what kind of effort they're making for the multicultural community, because if 10 or 11 million people have been impacted by this, and Optus, I know, makes a big effort to get people, certainly in Broadmeadows, they put a lot of effort in signing up newly arrived refugees and a lot of people in the Portuguese and Italian communities who might not have English as their first or even their fourth language. How are they going about telling everyone? And how are these people who are disadvantaged at the best of times going to work with all of this? Like, this is just the biggest nightmare. And the more you think about it, the worse it gets. And I wish at the end of this sentence I had something hopeful. I don't. This is going to happen again. It's going to continue sucking until someone makes it stop. Yay.
So it's that time of year again. PAX AUS, the big gaming convention, is coming to Jeff's Shed in Melbourne. For the first time in a few years, we can actually go to Jeff's Shed again and be together. Alice, what are the big attractions this year?
There is so much happening at PAX. I'm actually really, really excited. There's heaps of panels. There's so many panels. There's more panels than probably ever before. Expo Hall is as big as ever with a newly focused focus, newly featured focus. There's more tabletop gaming, is what I'm trying
Cool.
to say, and I'm quite excited about that. There's a new Streamland area. It used to be Bandland, now it's Streamland, so you can meet your favorite streamers if that's something you would like to do. There's more entertainment stuff. I was given the power to in-state movie nights. So, there's a lot to look forward to.
So they've still kept the basic format because the basic format has always been the one end, because Jeff's Shed is like 5 basically halls that can all join together and you choose how
For
many
the
of you want.
non-Victorians amongst
So
us,
the
Adam, I
convention
believe
centre.
means the Melbourne
Yeah,
Melbourne
right,
Convention Exhibition Centre.
right
Yeah.
on
Or MSEC.
right on the river across the road from the casino.
So one of the things, and admittedly, it has been a number of years since we last recorded at PAX 2019, I think it was, which means we haven't recorded there this decade. That's kind of scary. But one of the things that really struck me was that really interesting balance between tabletop and retro. And anyone who knows me knows that's my jam. And then the big gaming studios, and then the indie studios, and the showcase on Melbourne International Games Week, for example. And the way that kind of mixed in together so that PAX could be in the style of a Comic Con or other big conventions. It could be a very different individual convention for different people, depending on what they want to do.
Mm.
I imagine that even in these post-COVID times, that's still true, Alice?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to spend all your time down at Expo Hall playing the latest video games or checking out tabletop, you can do that. There's heaps and heaps of booths for video games. There's also about 2/5 of the floor dedicated to tabletop games, including for the first time a tabletop indie rising area, similar to the PAX rising area in the other bit. Or you can go to the convention building or exhibition building, the convention building, that's the one. And there's heaps and heaps of theaters. There's a new cosplay theater, and of course, PAX Together.
So that's where you come in, PAX Together. So that was the Diversity Lounge, and now it's
The artist
Yes.
formerly known as
Yes.
the Diversity Lounge, yes.
Yes, and I will absolutely accidentally call it the Diversity Lounge several times, and I do apologize, dear listener. But yes, it is now called PAX Together. It has been rebranded in the US and thus also here. Uh, the Diversity Lounge has been.
PAX Together.
Oh, no. Actually, no. This time I am talking about the Diversity Lounge. Okay. So the Diversity Lounge has been my and my wife's baby since 2014. It has been lovingly described to some people as gay mini PAX. And this year, it's growing even more into its own as PAX Together. It's still going to have the same lounge filled with tournaments and meetup hours and games focused around accessibility and indie developers and a full tabletop library. But we've also got our own theatre this year, in addition to the community group area,
So
which now also has indie developers in it.
is it just the content that's different in there, or is the way that things are presented different? Like if I walked into that area, how would it look and feel different to the rest of PAX?
It's a much more chill space. So we deliberately make the lounge a place where you can go to relax a bit. The expo floor is a sensory overload.
Yes.
It's amazing. There's so
It's
many
hectic.
people, so many things, so many lights, so many sounds. Everyone's moving, everything's happening. Whereas the lounge, we have 12 playable video games on one side where you can just put on some headphones, chill out, and play some of the same games that are on the show floor. We have a almost full tabletop library. It is nowhere near the size of the tabletop library downstairs, but it does still have well over 100 games in it, I'm pretty sure. I have not counted. That you can borrow and play with friends. There's also specific tabletop Meetup Hours and tournaments, so you can come and learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering. And yeah, then there's also the community group area where you can meet some of the groups that work with the communities in both accessibility and the queer community and indie games. And then there is also the theatre. I love the theatre.
What goes on in the theatre?
What goes on in the theatre, my friend, is a lot of panels. Certainly my favorite panels throughout PAX because I am completely biased. Each day we'll have at least 2 panels interpreted by an Auslan interpreter. We've got so I look at the schedule because now I get to talk all about the awesome battles. So we've got a character recreator, which is exploring gender expression through video games, kind of how transgender people discovered and played with gender through games, which I think is going to be really, really interesting. Tell Us We're Dreamin', Making Video Games Driven by Values and Spite is a panel I'm really excited about because it's done by the Wayward Strand folks, talking about how they made one of Australia's biggest video games this year. We've got accessibility at Xbox. I interviewed the the director of accessibility at Xbox, kind of about what they've achieved, what they're looking to achieve, with tips and tricks for people. We've got TTRPGs for social health. We've got learn to write and like panels on how to make your own games. We've got what kind of year has it been, which is a panel I do with a friend about queer representation in pop culture and video games. We've got a Xena Nintendo 64 fighting game tournament, which is always popular. It is the worst game ever released. There's no skill involved.
I might have a contention bone on that, but it's not a good game. I'll give
It
you
is.
that.
Yeah, have you played?
Yes.
Are
Yeah.
you going to come along and try and win a prize?
You might see me there.
Very good. Yeah. Well, immediately after that, we've got a Xena musical episode sing along, so it's quite a themed evening. I highly recommend it. The first Xena musical episode is very, very good. There is also another one. Um, yeah, we've got more panels about mental health. One that I'm really, really excited is with Mina Shamale. Actually, he's doing 2 panels, but this first one is about jamming with First Nations and how he made the music for a game called Enchanted. He's a composer who just makes the most incredible music, and he'll be talking about how he worked with First Nations artists to make a properly representative score. And then we have so many. It's just really good. Just come. There's gonna be Nerd Quiz again, which is Donald Duong and my quiz show, where it gets weird. And my favorite segment of that quiz show used to be called Dead Evil Pregnant, where you had to match the same-sex attracted female character with the trope she ended up in. It is now called Dead Evil Cancelled After 1 season. So look
Brutal.
forward to that.
Brutal but fair.
A reflection of the times we live in, sadly.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's gonna be really, really cool. I'm excited about it. I'm really proud of all the people who have applied to do panels. I think it's going to be the best panels we've ever had up in PAX together. I think there's going to be some really interesting and helpful stuff for people. And it's just, I don't know, it's a space that I'm really, really proud of because it celebrates diversity in all its forms, be it accessibility, sexuality, gender, race. Like, this is the place where you go to feel welcome and go beyond just diversity 101. This is where we get into the details and where you find your friends and your family.
When you say accessibility, are you talking accessibility for people who might be like visually impaired, or and how much of games developers actually made an effort to incorporate those people?
Yeah, that's exactly. So we've got consoles and PCs in the lounge with the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which is designed for people with physical disabilities. In past years, we've had games designed specifically for blind gamers, and another year we've had games for deaf gamers. This year, we've got the Auslan interpreter, and we've got more of a focus on mental health and people on the autism spectrum, as well as physical disabilities and all range of accessibility needs through the panel with Anita.
See, I'm now wondering whether Auslan has specific vocab for gamer lingo. I genuinely don't know, but it's an area that I'm quite interested in because Auslan is, of course, its own distinct sign language. And I'd love to see actually what some of those translations might be.
I
Teabag,
strongly
for
encourage it.
example.
Well, I can give you the names of the panels that we've actually got in Auslan so you can see. Because, yeah, it is a full language with, uh, yeah, words for everything. So on Friday, Character Recreator at 10:30 a.m. and Tell Us We're Dreaming, that video games made with Spite, at midday. On Saturday, it's Gaming for Good, Games for Social Health, and Pixel Heart's video game Blind Date at 5:30 p.m. Then on Sunday, it's the Tin Star Tabletop Games Making Workshop at midday, and at 2:30, it's Indigenizing Game Development. So these are the 6 that we have definitely translated into Auslan, but we also have an Auslan interpreter on call if you are a member of the deaf community or you have a friend who's a member of the deaf community who wants to come and learn how to play, say, Dungeons and Dragons or play a different game or see one of the other panels. Just let us know. We can call our incredible interpreter, Kiki, amazing, and we'll come make it happen.
So PAX, obviously, there's a promotional element to it as well, but there is also there's a social element as well to PAX, a coming together, and as you say, it's meant to be an inclusive space for people.
Yeah, but it can also be a bit overwhelming. You're one of tens of thousands of people in this space, and it can sometimes be hard to find your people. So I think it's really important. Have a look at the schedule and look at our meetup hours in the lounge. So they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. So we've got a Women in Games networking hour on Friday, which is really good if you're wanting to become a part of the games industry, or you already are, or you just want to meet people who are. We've also got things like a trans board game hour, so you can come and meet people who might be like you or who you're interested in talking to. I've got an accessibility lunch chat, so you can have your lunch and swap tips with people. Uh, Basically, we've got also a queer pride walk meetup uh, in the lounge, which is basically just they're getting a group of strangers together who will soon become friends so they can go and check out the expo hall together as a group. So if they're feeling a bit nervous about going by themselves, here is an instant group of friends who you can come look at it with. And so, yeah, don't be afraid to come to these meetup hours, even if you're not 100% sure you're a part of that group. Just come and make friends. It's my favorite thing about the convention is seeing people go from being timid strangers on a Friday to having a whole group of brand new best friends on Sunday. It really is like kindergarten. Like, you will find your best friends and it will be awesome.
Do you have finger paints?
We don't, but we should one day. Yeah, that's something for next year. We do have a puzzle table though. So if you're feeling a bit stressed, you can come and contribute to the PAX Together puzzle. I think we have a different puzzle each day. Just fun stuff.
We should also note that, of course, Adam and I will be at PAX, not in a formal way, but we will actually be attending PAX. Adam's there for a little bit longer, but we will both be there on the Friday. So if you do happen to see us, come up and say hello.
We will be standing physically next to each other for the first time in about 3 years.
This is true, and
Yes.
we may have to work out who still holds the vertical hold retro gaming crown.
Well, I want our award from last year because it's been living at your house for a year. I'm hoping you're going to bring it down and it can live at my house for a year.
I can be convinced.
I have a chainsaw if you want to cut it in half.
Tempting, but I think it'll lose some of its value at that point. But yeah, so it's going to be our first outside broadcast, our first recording that's not in the vertical hold studios for about 3 years.
And we should point out for the regular listeners that it will be going out a little bit later as a result, because we're recording it on the Friday afternoon and it should be out by the early Friday evening, all things being well. But before we get to next week's episode, we should wrap up this week's episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Alice for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And Alice, it's time once again for you to face up to the patented, not Lego endorsed, but brick and stud compatible Vertical Hold 3 Questions of Doom. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find your social media? And our new big contentious question. When you lay down the writing tools at the end of a busy week, what's your go-to activity to unwind?
Okay, well, the answer to the first question is you can find my work online. Uh, Look for the Press Any Button newsletter on Substack. We also have a Twitter page and a Facebook page. It is a newsletter, a gaming newsletter I write each week with the lovely Tim Biggs. You can also read my work at the Oz and Gizmodo and Kotaku and Finder and all those other places. But like Press Any Button, really, really good. You can find me on Twitter at AliceDKC. And the thing I do to relax, as you suggested, is actually I build a lot of Lego. Just so much, an unhealthy amount of Lego. I also play a lot of Forza Horizon 5 and NBA 2K, and then just watch the trashiest, worst TV you have ever heard of. And it's glorious.
I don't think you can outdo the worst TV we had in last week's episode. I will leave that up to listeners to go and check out what that was. But you are otherwise obviously living your brand dream.
Mm.
And
Yes.
as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, via the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au.
And as always, thanks everyone for dropping by and chatting about a big PAX that's coming up. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. Hopefully, we'll run into you at PAX and you can help us spread the good word in 2022.